We're back again with another discussion of the Hero System RPG as opposed to Screaming Skyrim or something like that. Um, Today we're looking at, well, let me just say first off, this is not a game. I am not streaming my current group's game. This is a tabletop RPG, and I use the 5th edition rule set for this RPG Hero System, also known as Champions. The two names are often used interchangeably, even by myself, though I try to stick with Hero System because Champions tends to connote the superheroic variety of the game where you're playing in a superhero genre. So, that said, this is once again not going to be the game. This is me discussing various aspects of the rules and trying to get any people who are new to the system to looking at it and enjoying it and possibly maybe even joining us in a game. It's a very good system. It's got the potential to be any genre that you might want to play a role playing game in. So, I guess I should also mention that there is a 6th edition rule set. I use 5th edition rules. It's because, one, I'm more familiar with them, having been playing with them for a decade or so. I forget when 5th edition came out. Um, and then there's the fact that not only with COVID, but with just, the amount of gray in my beard and everything, life getting in the way leads to me not having as much time to devote to RPGs. So to be honest, there's really just not as much point and drive to update my rule set. That said, I encourage you to go out and support the system and go ahead and get into 6th edition. Um, there we have it. I do also use one other item from the Hero System tool set, and that is Hero Designer 6 software, which you see up in the background, or the foreground. I don't know how you really refer to these things in streams. And I highly recommend this because one of the complaints about Hero System is that there is a lot of math. It is very crunchy in that regard. And the Hero Designer software helps take some of that out and therefore take some of the sting out of it. I do have some streams where I've gone over some of the math and some of the nuts and bolts of actually doing it yourself to create characters, and I will probably do more as they come around. But a lot of stuff I do with the Hero Designer 6 software because, again, I recommend using it, and it does make things a lot easier. So, with that said, one of the we're going to look at today at one of the critical aspects of designing and building a character, and that is disadvantages. Disadvantages are a way of adding complications. In fact, I think in 6th edition they are called now complications. They are for adding flaws and quirks and issues with your character that makes them honestly more interesting, but also gives you more points than just the base allotment that the GM gives you to make your character with. Generally speaking, a character is made with a certain amount of base points. I will come over here to basic information, a certain amount of base points, plus an amount of disadvantages, and then you add on experience as your character becomes more experienced. Usually it won't be something like this. I did it this way because I want things where I don't have to see the pop-up warnings in the program of me exceeding point totals and things like that. So with that said, we're going to look specifically at disadvantages and what they mean, how you apply them, what types of things might be applied to them. And this is in hopes of getting back to doing a few character builds later on. Like I said in a few previous streams, I've done character builds and mentioned or gone over some of these disadvantages. But I thought today would be a good day to actually go over the disadvantages in total. So this may be a long stream. It may wind up being a lot shorter than I thought. But that said, let's delve right into it and let's just take them in order. The first disadvantage you can get is called accidental change. Let's click and bring up its box. Now, accidental change is for those that have more than one form. In other words, they have utilized a power like multiform or like shapeshift, and they have more than one aspect, more than one form, more than one potential character sheet that they have that they can change between. And accidental change simply means that they can, under certain circumstances, without their consent or control, change into one of these other forms. A good example would be a werewolf under a full moon. That said, how do you set it up? Well, first, you do your chance to change, which starts out at base points at 8 or less. This 8 with a minus sign behind it is typically read 8 or less, or 11 or less, or what have you. While there is a perfectly good mathematical symbol less than or greater than, this is a good shorthand notation, easy to read, easy to remember, and it doesn't cause people that much trouble, but you do have to kind of get used to seeing it that. And this is 8 or less on 3d6. So you take 3 6-sided dice, roll them, and on a total of 8 or less, so 3 through 8, you accidentally change. You can up that to 11 or less, or 14 or less, and you can even make it always. Under the circumstances, you always make the change. A werewolf under full moon, he will always change into this wolfman form. So, this is how the first thing you set up. How frequently do you change under the circumstance? Then you've got to choose your circumstance. Is it uncommon? Is it common? Or is it very common? The werewolf's full moon would probably be, in my estimation, uncommon. While the full moon is an inescapable phenomenon, it only comes around once for 3 out of 30 days, right? Or 27. So, it's not that common an occurrence. It's a recurring occurrence, but you have warning of it, and it's not going to cripple you throughout most of the time. So it's an uncommon circumstance. Then you have common circumstances. For a for a superheroic campaign, this might be something like when you take body damage. Remember, there are 2 types of hit points in the champions or the hero system. There is stun damage, stun hit points. When you run out of stun, you're unconscious. Then there is body. When you run out of body, you are dead. Okay? So one is, just stunning you, and you're getting closer and closer to being knocked unconscious. The other is you're cut or otherwise hemorrhaging or otherwise taking physical, permanent until healed damage. And so, for a superhero campaign, 4-color type anyway, not talking Punisher or something like that, but more Spider-Man, taking body damage is usually not a thing that they have, so it would be common, but not terribly common. So that would be possibly an example of a common. Depending on the scenario, it might be very common. If a lot of killing attacks or something like that are used, it might be very common. Or another very common of circumstances might be when the character gets wet. Because water is a very common substance. It could be raining out. You could be splashed. So, if you set the accidental change to happen whenever the character gets wet, that might be a very common circumstance. The commonality or the commonness of the circumstance honestly is something you and your GM should work out. Or you as a GM, you need to think about just how often is this going to pop up in your games and set it that way. Then we set the situation, um, which essentially just means, um, actually, I don't know what it's mean. I've never set a situation other than the circumstance. Um, it could be that, you know, getting wet isn't enough. You've got to be in a circumstance where you're constantly getting wet or something like that. But, the bottom line is this is a situation or a circumstance that happens. You have a chance, or you may always change into one of your alternate forms. So this is not a disadvantage that all or even probably most characters are going to have, but it is available for those that have multiple forms that come about. I'm going to skip custom disadvantage in this discussion because essentially it's for situations. Well, let's go ahead and click on it and show you. Basically, the GM just assigns you some points. It's for a disadvantage that doesn't fit any of these other categories, but it is still deemed appropriate. So the GM sets the amount of points you get for that disadvantage. My experience is I've never had to use it. Most things, most disadvantages, most flaws can be easily represented by one of these other disadvantage categories. So it's there because, this is a game of the imagination. So people can come up with things that just simply weren't expected or covered. So it's there, but realistically, I've not seen it ever come up. So we're going to move on to dependence. A dependence, pardon, a dependence is a substance or situation that the character must have or have happen. Okay, this is addiction. This is recharging that must be done for your powers to work. Okay, so the first thing you need to take then is take into account then is the effect. This can be taking normal damage, 1d6 normal damage. And the thing to remember there is until you get your dependence, you can't heal that damage. So that stun damage and that body damage, you get no defense against it. You just take that damage. So while you can take up to 3d6 damage, I don't recommend that because that's 3d6 damage that you don't get any of your defense. No PD, no ED, no mental defense, no power defense, no nothing against it. Here, have some stun. Here, have some body damage. And it's not going to come back until you meet the dependence requirement. So I just don't recommend that. But as you saw when I clicked on it, there are other options. You can take minus 10 active points from the affected power. So if it simply weakens one or more of your powers, you can take this as an option. Minus 10, minus 20, or minus 30 active points. Now, do keep in mind, there is a time element that's coming up that I will discuss, and you take this damage every time that time increment comes up that you haven't met the requirements of your dependence here. So it is entirely possible that you could have your power drained away or that you could die from not meeting your dependence. Okay, you can also put an activation roll on your powers, and this activation roll goes down each time increment. So a 14 or less activation roll goes down to an 11 or less, then an 8 or less, then whatever the GM or however the GM decides on it. So again, and then you can take an incompetence, minuses to your skill rolls. Or a weakness, minus to negatives to your characteristics rolls. So basically, this is just the damage, the effect of not meeting the requirements of your dependence. So then you determine what the dependent substance is. Is it a very common substance? Well, then that's not going to be worth as many points. Examples might be caffeine. You've got to have your caffeine. That's a very common substance in modern times, anyway. And so you're not going to get much in the way of points for it. Now, if you were transported back to medieval times, you would probably get quite a bit of points for that because you're probably not going to meet that dependence once you run out of whatever supply of caffeine you brought with you, unless you're in certain locations like Central America or South America, wherever coffee beans first originated and were cultivated. So, very common substance, uh, which means it's easy to obtain. Then there's common substance, difficult to obtain substances, uncommon and extremely difficult to obtain substances. Um, this last category would be something like if you're a alien from another planet and you have to have some exotic uh, concoction extracted from plants that can only be found on your home world, that's going to be extremely difficult to obtain unless you've got a starship at your beck and call to transport you there to get this substance. So, again, you probably want to eyeball taking an extremely difficult to attain or really uncommon substance as your dependence. Last but not least, you have to specify the substance, but you also have to specify the time increment at which the dependence acts on you. This pretty much follows the time chart. It starts out at one segment so that every second you have to have this concoction, this dependent substance, or every phase, which means every one of your actions, or once per turn, which is 12 seconds, minute, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour. And you see we get a marked reduction in the amount of points we get for this disadvantage as we go down the chart. So from 1 hour to 6 hours takes away 5 points. So yeah, and again, it basically follows, the standard time chart for this game. That anything past the day is not going to get you any points for this disadvantage. It all come from the effect and from the difficulty of obtaining the substance. Then there's addiction, which is full blown, and you get 25 points for that, but you're now addicted to that substance, and so forth. Well, it sounds like this is already addiction. Yes, it can be, but it can mimic a lot of other things as well. Superman's powers are dependent on being around a yellow sun, and things like this. So, dependence can mimic things besides addiction, but it mimics addiction very well. So that's what a dependence entails and involves. So then there's dependent NPCs, or DNPCs as they're often referred to. DNPCs are non-player characters, so they must be non-player, whom your character, or the character, feels responsible for. Now, these characters also get into trouble periodically, either because your heroing identity is known and somebody tracked your family down, so family members could be DNPCs, or it could be a fellow employee of your secret identity's company that you feel responsible for because they're always getting into trouble, often because they're just happen to be around when you are around. So these are NPC characters that simply can get into trouble and you feel the need to protect them, to extract them from the situation, etc. And so there is an appearance level. Now, this does not mean they only appear on these circumstances. This is relatively a gauge of how often they are in trouble and need you to bail them out, or need the character, I should say, I guess, to bail them out. So that again could become in the form of 8 or less, 11 or less, or 14 or less. Again on 3 die 6. Um, so this is how often they get into trouble. They may appear in every game session, but it's only on this that the GM will, on this level, this frequency, that the GM will have them actively need to be saved. Okay. Then there's the usefulness of the DNPC. If they are incompetent, like Spider-Man, Peter Parker's Aunt May in the older comic books, where she was an older elderly lady, she might be incompetent. She might be based on minus 20 total character points. In other words, no base points, only some disadvantages of her own. So she would have comparably negative points. So that's incompetent. An infant might be another example of such. Okay, then they're a normal person. They're the normal average Joe out there, which means they're normally built on 50 points, 25 base, 25 of disadvantages. Now, that can change with the GM. What does normal mean? That's up to the GM. But generally speaking, it means they're non powered, non super skilled individual. And so they're going to be your normal Joe. They maybe have some skills of their own. You may break into the villain's lair to find that they've already gotten themselves out of the handcuffs or something like that. But they're not going to have breaking them and be pummeling an enemy villain or agent in all likelihood. Okay? Then there's slightly less powerful than the PC. And that comes into play with if you're playing superheroes, for instance, this is very possible. They may be a lesser superhero, a lesser powered individual than you are, your character is. So they are slightly less powerful than the PC. Again, this is a GM call. If you're playing, like I made this character up, if I were going to make it, if you're playing a 450 point character, slightly less powerful, maybe still a potent hero on their own, 250, 300 points, but they are still significantly less powered than you are. So your villains, your enemies, are still going to far outstrip what they are capable of dealing with. And then finally, there is as powerful as the PC and are the character. And they're built on the same kind of point scale you are. They have no more trouble with your enemies than you do, so forth. Um, so I kind of think that was aimed at um, potentially allowing for another PC to be your DNPC, but I don't really think so. And the reason I think that is because protecting a fellow PC is usually handled on a later category called a psychological limitation, and we'll get to that in a little bit. There are some other modifiers for this. If the character, the DNPC, has useful non-combat position or skills, say they're a mayor or a governor or the president of the United States, something like that, then they have useful non-combat position or skills, and that's going to get you 5 points less than normal for your character for taking this disadvantage. If the NPC is unaware of your adventuring career because you have a secret identity, Aunt May versus Peter Parker, right? She doesn't realize he's Spider-Man. That's worth 5 more points for the DNPC. And then finally, let's say you took your whole family, birth family, as your DNPC, you can get a bonus for how many there are. Okay, up to infinite number of DNPCs, but you got to remember, um, you may have to go save these, and you may be put in situations where you can't save them all, so you've got to pick which ones, which leads to you getting some psychological limitations, possibly in the future. But basically, if you've got a group of people that you want to keep alive, want to keep in shape and not in the clutches of the villain, that's what this little checkbox is for, and you simply get multiples of 2 for each of those. And so that's DNPCs. And that's a disadvantage that I see quite frequently popping up on heroic level characters. Honestly, the accidental change doesn't come up very often. Dependence doesn't come up very often for heroes. But DNPCs, the source material of both heroic level and superheroic level material is rife with DNPCs. So keep that in mind. This is probably a good one to choose, although it becomes kind of old hat and cliched. But you're not going to run into that. All right, I should delete that because I'm not really doing a build here. All right, so then there's distinctive features. Again, most of these are self-explanatory, to be honest. Distinctive features are just that. They're features or traits of your character that are distinctive. They mark them out. They can be anything from scars or tattoos to you always quip with puns in combat. And bottom line, they mark you out. They set you apart. It's harder to hide amongst the masses the more distinctive you are. And so you start out with that by doing how concealable is it? Is it easily concealed? Can you just go into the drugstore, buy a hair color kit, and change your hair to a different color? Easily concealed. Can you just shut your mouth and not make the puns? Easily concealed. Okay. Then there's concealable. These at this level, you have to have the disguise skill, or somebody with the disguise skill has to work on you. And bottom line is it takes a little effort to disguise the distinctive feature. It can still be done, but it takes effort now. It takes skill. And then finally, there's not concealable. There's nothing you can do about it. It's going to be seen. It's going to be noticed. This would be something like maybe Firestorm, to use the source material, and his flaming head, or the Ghost Rider with his flaming flaming skull visage. There's no concealing this. He tries to pull a hood up, it burns up in the flames. So it's not concealable. All right. Then we get into the reaction. How do people react to seeing this? Do they notice it and recognize it? Hey, that she had pink hair, or he had pink hair, or they had pink hair. Okay, it's noticed and it's recognized, but people don't really think anything of it. Then there's that it's always noticed and causes major reaction. Sorry if your head's on fire. Well, no, that's going to be the next category. Always noticed and causes a major reaction. In modern society, maybe you don't take a bath very often and you have a distinctive odor. Okay, people are always going to notice this, and it's going to cause a major reaction. People are going to look at you, they're going to notice you. And so that's the type of level we're talking about there. And then finally, there's extreme reaction. Holy crap, that guy's head's on fire. Okay, holy crap, his whole face is a skull. So that's what the extreme reaction is about. Is this is something that's so out of the ordinary, so open and obvious that people are going to be going, holy crap. In a heroic level medieval setting, fantasy setting, maybe you being an orc or a troll is going to cause an extreme reaction because you're a bloodthirsty animal, you're a beast, that sort of thing. Okay? And then there's a category that you get points for how difficult it is to sense the the distinctive feature. Is it detectable by commonly used senses? In other words, can people see it? Can they smell it? Can they taste it? Well, hopefully they're not tasting it. Things like this. Is it easily detectable by senses that everyone has? But then we can get into detectable by virtually everyone. Almost everybody can see this. Or it's detectable only by uncommon senses. You don't get as many points for that. But, you know, maybe it's only detectable when you use X ray vision. Well, that wouldn't be uncommon. That'd be very uncommon. But, that's the type of thing. There's some uncommon senses, radio hearing and so forth, that, it might only be detectable there. Maybe you give off radio emissions. So if they have radio hearing, they can detect that you're transmitting all the time. And then there's such things as for detectable by a large group, detectable by simple tests, by only by unusual senses, which gave you a big reduction in the point value of it. Small group or only by technology or major effort. So in the Marvel universe, that last might be, let's call it up here, might be that you're a mutant. Um, it takes a technological gadget or other major effort to determine, hey, this guy's a mutant. All right. Then finally, you must describe the distinctive feature, not future, the distinctive feature. So this is up to you. This is, again, you've got to come up with something that singles your character out, that is making them distinctive. And, okay, and really finally here, it may be something that is not distinctive in some cultures. Pink hair may not be distinctive in some locations. It may just not be something that's taken notice of or noted at all because so many people have it. So, you know, not distinctive in some cultures. Now, again, you are a modern person with pink hair who goes back to medieval times. Until your hair grows out so that you can get rid of the pink, you are probably very distinctive and probably going to get an extreme reaction even. So, a lot of this stuff on distinctive features is relative to the culture and the situation, but it may or may not be that you need to check that box. You need to check with your GM. Um, so then comes up, um, you know, can I buy distinctive features multiple times? As the answer to that is with most of these disadvantages is yes. Here's the caveat. You should not, and GMs, you should watch out for this. Multiple scars do not mean multiple distinctive features. It just makes you more distinctive. All right. So you should get one disadvantage for having a lot of scars, but it should be more noticeable. You should get a bigger disadvantage for that. For you to get a second distinctive feature disadvantage, you should be doing something or have something going on that is distinct from the other one. In other words, you could theoretically get a disadvantage for facial scarring, but you could also get a distinctive feature because you're always quipping and making wisecracks. Now, normally I would actually put that as a psychological limitation, as we will get to. But if it's something that you just do because you do it, it could be a distinctive feature as well, and that would be a distinct and separate distinctive feature from facial scarring. And so you might get two of these distinctive feature disadvantages. All right, I hope that makes sense. But the bottom line is you generally will have one distinctive feature. It would just be varying value for it depending on just how distinctive it makes you. All right. That said, let's move on to enraged. Enraged means you have a tendency to go berserk. Now, there is a checkbox down here for berserk, and I will get into the difference that makes in a moment. But at the enraged level, when your enraged is triggered, you immediately target whatever the entity or thing that set off your condition, your enraged condition. You immediately attack it. You go on the full offensive. All of your combat levels go into OCV, offensive combat value. You're not thinking of defending yourself anymore. You're not thinking of protecting yourself. You are attacking this target to the exclusion of all other targets, and you're trying to take them down. So you're going to hit them with your most potent attacks, your most potent abilities that you can muster. Okay? Now, when that target goes down, if you haven't gone down yourself beforehand, then now you do the same. Well, now you roll to recover. I got to get my steps in order. If you make your recovery, you're back to normal. You can react and act normally now. If you do not make this recovery roll, you now attack at the enraged level the nearest available enemy target. So you take it down your first target. You didn't recover from the enraged, so now you attack the nearest available enemy. And you keep doing this until either A, you recover from being enraged, or you run through all of the available enemies, at which point you attack nearest available target. So there is a chance with this disadvantage that you could end up attacking a teammate or even a perfectly innocent normal. So it's probably not a good thing for heroic characters to have. Okay? If you're supposed to be the good guys, you probably don't want even an enraged, much less a berserk. Because what a berserk does is you remember with the enraged, you go on to the nearest available enemy target, right? Until you run out of enemies. With a berserk, you finish the target that set you off, and then if you don't recover, you immediately go to nearest available target. Enemy, friend, foe, squishy normal, it doesn't matter. You attack at the berserk level, nearest available target. Okay? So let's go into building an enraged or berserk. Again, there is a circumstance that sets off the disadvantage. This circumstance could be viewed as uncommon, common, or very common. Very common might be sees the color red. You see something red, you immediately attack it. And once you've shredded it, you try to recover. If you fail to recover, you attack the nearest available possible target of opportunity. Okay? So that's at the berserk level. At the enraged level, you move on to another enemy. So, definitely when you get into very common levels of enraged or berserk, you're becoming a hazard. Okay? So keep that in mind. Because theoretically, you're part of a team, you're part of a table of other players. If your circumstance is very common, chances are you are now a hazard to the team. You are going to wind up attacking one of them. So if you must have this disadvantage, chances are you should probably try to make it an uncommon circumstance. All right? So then you have your chance to become enraged. This starts out at 8 or less, can go to 11 or less, or 14 or less. Remember again, this is on 3 die 6. Take 3 6-sided dice, throw them, total them up, and if your number comes up this number or less, you're now enraged. Okay? So to put it in perspective, at 11 or less, you've got roughly a 50-50 shot that it's a little over 50% that you're going to go enraged. So putting that down says if your circumstance comes up, you're a little more than 50% likely that you're going to go enraged. So this is a bad thing. If you're part of a team, if you're not a villain anyway. All right. Then there's your chance to recover. It starts out at 14 or less this time and goes down to 8 or less. The reason is because, again, you're throwing 3 dice 6, totaling them up, and you're trying to get that number or less. If you do, you're no longer enraged. You calm down. You're cool-headed again. Everything is fine. All right? So somebody that does something like this, 14 or 14 or less to go enraged and 8 or less to recover, this is someone who is just planning on pounding the crap out of his friends. Okay? He's planning on his character just beating the stew out of his friends and everybody else around him. All right? So this is why I say this is probably something better left to the villains and the bad guys. That said, feel free, take it. Want to really do some damage? Take it as a berserk. Really hurt your friends and table mates and get kicked out of the group. But this is what enraged and berserks are about. Okay? And so just be careful with it if you decide to put it on a PC. As a GM, you feel free. You're making the opponents, so maybe they do tear into each other occasionally. Then there's the ever-present and loved Hunted. This is a character or group that is actively pursuing, for some reason, your character. Okay? Again, there's an appearance level of 8, 11, or 14 or less. This is how often they show up looking for you. Then there's their capabilities. Are they less powerful than you are, as powerful, or more powerful? Now, this does not the potency of necessarily every member of the group. So we often, in my superhero games I played in, there was a organization called Viper, which was a world domination type organization wanting to take over the world. And even though their individual agents are less powerful than my character, because it was an organization, it was considered a more powerful hunted, because their individual agents had access to equipment and so forth, and there was a lot of them. And, a lot of ants can bring down big prey, right? So individually, they may have been ants. All together, they were a problem. So that's where the power level comes in. You can take a less powerful hunted, but that's kind of the nuisance hunted, the kid that keeps showing up wanting to have a gunfight with you. You clearly can beat this kid, need to knock some sense into him, but he keeps showing up. So you keep having to deal with him. All right, that's the less powerful. As powerful means this is a hero or villain of comparable power level to yourself, and more powerful, they are capable of feats that you can't do. Then there's their motivation. Harshly punished. This could be killing you, this could be putting you in jail, this could be, taking you and selling you into slavery. They want to harshly punish you for whatever transgression you have done against them. There's also a capture, where they just want to capture you, possibly for somebody else, an even bigger hunted maybe. Or they are watching you, which halves the value of this, but maybe they just want to watch. Maybe if you're superheroes, maybe the government is watching you to make sure that you don't step out of line. So that's a watched. And then there's the option to mildly punish. They just want to show you up. They want to make you look bad. They want to make you look weak, or something like that. So that's mildly punish. So you set their motivation. Are they wanting to harshly punish you? They wanting to put you away? They just want to watch what you're doing, make sure you're still on the up and up? Or do they want to mildly punish you, make you look foolish, something like that? Then there are some modifiers to that. If they have the hunted has an extensive non-combat influence, this means they're well connected, have a lot of contacts or a lot of friends. They might have extensive non-combat influence. Then there's limited geographical area. If they can only hunt you when you're inside the boundaries of a particular nation or something like that, if you're international anyway, then you would have to check that and get 5 points less on the disadvantage. And then finally, if you have a public ID or otherwise are easy to find, you can get more out of this disadvantage because you're easy to find. Okay, so that's hunted, and you can take several of these. In superhero genre, you're always, as I have said as a GM, and as several GMs have said to me, chances are an organization like Viper that is going to be a prominent villain in the game, you're going to end up with them as a hunted anyway. You may as well take it for disadvantage points, right? So there are often groups and organizations that your character is going to foil curses left and right, so you may as well take the disadvantage points for it. Okay, finally, not finally, but then you can take money as a disadvantage. If your character is poor, that's worth 5 points, or they can be destitute, living on the street, in which case that's worth 10 points. So money can be a disadvantage to your character. Uh, Sorry, my throat keeps drying out and getting rough on me. So we'll move along then to physical limitations. Physical limitations should be actually not viewed as just having only one arm or being colorblind or something like that. Physical limitations are in essence things your character cannot do. Not things they won't do, but they are, for whatever reason, simply incapable of doing it. For instance, can't swim. That could be either a physical limitation or a psychological limitation. If your character is perfectly capable of swimming, but for whatever reason can't, then that's a psychological limitation. They can get the training and eventually learn how to swim. If your character is a dwarf who is 3 times denser, because his muscle mass is so great compared to his fat level, being, half again the size of a normal human, can't swim may be a physical limitation for them because they just physically can't swim. It doesn't matter how long they train, it doesn't matter how much they try to do, they are going to sink like a stone. Okay? So that would be a physical limitation. And so that's something to keep in mind. If it's something your character cannot do, no matter how much training or time is taken, then that's a physical limitation. If it's something they won't do, or just haven't been trained how to do, then that's a potential psychological limitation. So, how do you set up a physical limitation? First off, you set how often it inconveniences you. If it only comes up infrequently, or maybe it's frequent, or maybe it's all the time. For instance, being blind would be an example of an all the time physical limitation. You don't, you're not blind for 3 hours out of every day and then suddenly can see for 3 hours and then you can't see again for another 3. Generally speaking, if you're blind, you're blind. Now, some caveats to that. Someone like Daredevil would probably not get, or he would probably get the all the time, but he would not get as much of a disadvantage for this next step, which is how strongly it impairs. For Daredevil, being blind is only slightly impairing. His sonic sense, takes over so well that other than not necessarily being able to make out color and things like that, it doesn't impair him that he can't see you. Okay? So you then, after you choose how often the limitation limits you, You then must make how great of an impairment is it? Is it greatly impaired, slightly impairing, or is it greatly, or is it fully impairing? Slightly impairing might be your character is colorblind. Okay, you're not going to be able to sit there and clip the red wire to defuse the bomb because which wire is the red wire? And yes, in this case, that means the color blindness is pretty much monochromatic vision. Okay, so keep that in mind. There's a bit of granularity to the system, and you have to watch out for that. When we say colorblind, we're probably talking monochromatic, full on color blindness. All right, so that's physical limitations. And if y'all have any questions out there, if you're listening in live on this, please feel free to type them in and let me know. But that's for physical limitations. And about all I can say about them. Other than this could indeed be anything from you're missing a hand to color blindness to full on blindness to loss of hearing to some things that you would think, hey, not think of as being a physical limitation, like um, um, not being able to swim. That said, one that comes up every now and then is what about something like cannot read? Well, that goes back to the qualifier again. If it's physically impossible for your character to read, like they have some seriously whacked up level of, say, dyslexia, I don't even know what that would be called, simply so that any type of writing just looks like so many moving twigs and sticks on a page, then that might be a physical limitation. Okay, it's not something that they can train their brain to get by doing things a different way or using a different font or something like that that I've heard tell dyslexics often use. They train themselves. Um, it's literally a matter of you can't read, period. You can't learn to read. You can't be taught to read. Then it's a physical limitation. All right. So physical limitations are things your character simply cannot do. That said, all of these I should also note, could be bought off at one point in the future if something occurs that um, um, allows you to rectify the lack. Like if your character, say, was missing a hand and your buddy was Tony Stark, he might be able to make you a prosthetic hand that works just as well as a normal one, your original one. And so now you can buy off that disadvantage. So then comes the big one. Psychological limitations. Psychological limitations come in many flavors, varieties, and forms. And the bottom line is most characters, a lot of their disadvantage points are taken up as cyclims, which is why there's in the setting of the rules, GM set a limit on how many points can be taken from any one category of disadvantage. Okay, so from any one of these categories. And because, you can fill up pages of psychological limitations. In fact, there is a online site. I should have written down its name, and I didn't. I apologize. That has literally pages and pages of psychological limitations. But these can be things like overconfidence, hatreds, phobias, loves, must protect, codes of conduct, codes of honor, things like that. Psychological limitations are, in essence, things in your head that make you behave in certain ways. So, how do you get points for it? You again have to set how common is the situation that comes up. Um, you know, must tell puns, bad puns during combat. Well, first off, how common is combat going to be? And then, secondly, well, that would be the question. If combat is not a regular part of your adventures, then it'd be an uncommon situation. If combat plays a significant part, then that might be common or even very common. And you can see the active points change for that. Okay? Then there's the intensity, your level of reaction. Okay? This ranges from moderate to strong to total. At moderate level, this is behavior that you engage in but can stop yourself. If your pun telling during combat is something you do, but if things get tough, you go quiet just fine, it's probably at a moderate level. At the strong level, you have to make a willpower, an ego roll to not engage in the behavior. So this would be the guy who's tied to a chair wearing cement shoes and is still baiting and making quips at the mobsters that are about to throw him into the lake. Okay? This is the guy who can't stop himself until he's physically incapable of. And then there's total. And total would probably actually be that guy. Strong would be the guy who can finally be beaten into, okay, you guys win. But at the total level, yeah, you're not stopping this guy. He's going to make his wisecracks. Okay? So for like something like overconfidence would be a psychological limitation. If you're overconfident at the drop of a hat, that might be a common situation. And if you rush in without thinking about it, but are made to think about it, and still have now the choice of rushing in or not, that's strong level. Things like that. Again, this is definitely one that you want to work with your GM to set how often these situations occur and how strong they would want. I've run with GMs who did not like total limitations. They wanted you to always have the option of not engaging in the behavior. So they would not allow a total, really? Total psychological limitation, because they didn't want that level of you have no choice being in their game. Okay? Now I say you have no choice. If you notice that the total is 20 points for total and 15 for strong, if you get 5 points of experience and with the GM's approval want to buy it down, you can buy it down from total to strong, and now you can make that ego roll again, and for 5 more points you can buy it down to moderate. So keep that in mind too. All of these disadvantages can later be bought off with experience points given GM approval. And so that's psychological limitations, and I think you can come up with and see why this is commonly the most extensive section of the disadvantages portion of the character sheet on a character. Any of these phobias, any of these hatreds, any of these likes, dislikes, loves are psychological limitations. Okay, this is also why a PC should not be under a PC you want to take care of should not be under a DNPC. A PC that you want to take care of and interject yourself before they take damage and things like that is going to be a psychological limitation. Must protect character X. Okay? That's a psych lim. So then we come to reputation. This is bad reputation. I'm sorry if that came through the mic a little too strongly and blew your eardrums out. I apologize. But this cannot be emphasized enough. This is a bad reputation. This is you are not liked. You are disliked for some reason or other. And so, again, we have how often you are recognized for this bad reputation. 8 or less, 11 or less, or 14 or less. Okay? How often do people recognize you and say, oh, you're that guy or gal? Okay? Then you have to set your reputation. Okay? Known to be a hoodlum. known to be a troublemaker, known to destroy private property for no particular reason, things like that. It is a bad reputation. You can have a hero with a bad reputation. Yeah, the last superhero group I belonged to, I had a character in, was called, well, I won't tell you what they were called, but they were based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and we had a bad reputation for causing a lot of property damage. Okay, I mean, my character was a Colossus ripoff, and he liked to rip chunks out of the sidewalk and fling them at people. So we were known for causing a lot of property damage, and it was not a good they are known for it. Okay, so this is bad reputation. It can be extreme. In the case of a villain that's known for taking people's heads off, that would be an extreme reputation. People are now going to be terrified when they see this villain is present. Okay? Now, similarly, you can get a fewer points for it by taking known only to a small group. There's only a few people in the world that know you or know of you by this bad reputation. But the thing to remember is, as a disadvantage, this is strictly talking about bad reputation. If you want a good reputation, that's under perks. So you can have, in the end, both a good reputation by having the perk and a bad reputation. So keep that in mind as well. Then there's rivalry, easily the easiest of the disadvantages. Whoa, that's easy? Yeah. Okay. Is it professional, romantic, or professional and romantic? Okay. So is your rivalry based around professionalism? Is it based around romance? Or is it both? Okay. Then you describe the rivalry. I'm a rival with my character, Professor X, is a rival to Professor Malfoy. Okay? It is a professional rivalry. So is the rival less powerful, as powerful, or more powerful, or significantly more powerful than you are? Okay? This gets into, are they your boss? Are they a well-respected and known colleague who is constantly stealing your work? Okay, that would be more powerful or possibly significantly more powerful. So this is basically how much power or potency the rival has compared to you, how much respect and so forth. The fierceness of the rivalry. Are they just thinking to outdo, embarrass, or humiliate you? Or are they out to harm and kill you? So keep that in mind. It might be something you want to do, might be something you don't want to do. And then finally, is the rival aware of the rivalry? Okay. How might that happen? You want to outdo them, but they're completely unaware that they've triggered this response in you. So it's also in the case of a PC as a rival. Your fellow PC may not be aware of the fact that your character's trying to outdo their character. Now, you should go to the player and let them know that, but it would be the height of poor gamesmanship and metagaming for them to then proceed to have their character know without taking a similar disadvantage. And in fact, there's even a checkbox down here where you can get more points for it. The rival is a player character. So, sorry. So that's rival, and it's by far, despite all this complication that it looks like, it is by far the simplest of the disadvantages to set up. It is, however, one of the hardest to play. Because how do you play up that you're a rival of the other PC or the other character and so forth? How do you play that up? Well, that's up to you, but there we have it. So moving on, we've got social limitations. These are things that inhibit you because of society. These are things like secret identities. These are things like public identities. How can a public identity be a bad news? Well, everybody knows who you are. How well does that do for celebrities? They have public IDs. How easy is it for them to slip off on their own for a little while? Okay. How easy is it for the paparazzi to find them no matter where they go in the world? So secret IDs, public IDs, are all potential social limitations. Being a child, nobody takes you seriously. This is a social limitation. Um, one that's discriminatory, but having facial tattoos may be a distinctive feature and a social limitation depending on the society. But the bottom line is how often do the circumstances occur, usually done as occasionally, frequently, or very frequently, not as a dice roll. And then finally, what are the effects of what restrictions are put on you? Are they minor? Are they major? Are they severe? Do they keep you from being able to get a job? Do they put restrictions on your superheroing? Spider-Man, for instance, having a secret ID, um, it would probably be frequently and major because he has to be at school on time. He has to do all these other things that sometimes take away where he can't go be Spider-Man, you know, or he may have to go be Spider-Man simply because he has no choice. They've got Aunt May, but now he's absent from school. All right. So these are social limitations. I'm trying to think of some more. In the fantasy setting that I'm running, being an orc in the middle of the civilized races' cities is a social limitation. Almost nobody is going to want to deal with you because you're an orc. So, yeah. And then there's the usual not limiting in some cultures. And some places it may not be much of a limit. Now, check that box only if it's going to be a significant amount of time spent in those non-limiting situations. Um, don't just check it because you might end up in an orc tribe in the course of adventures. Um, if the bulk of the adventures are going to take place in human, elf, halfling, dwarfish lands, then there is absolutely no reason for you to check that because it's almost never going to be an issue. So that's social limitations. Susceptibilities. These are kind of like dependents. Okay? For a susceptibility, you are talking about something like Superman versus kryptonite. You are susceptible to a substance that normal people do not take damage from. You do. Or your character does, I guess. I keep interchanging that. And they just put it in dice of damage here. But this again could, with GM permission, be something like a drain against your powers or something to that effect. But again, this is damage that you take with no defense, and it does not heal back until you get away from whatever you're susceptible to. All right. Then we can again use the time chart to set up how often you take damage from this particular substance. So our situation, because it can be situational. So you are susceptible and take damage from a particular substance or a particular situation that normally does not bother anybody else, just you. You take damage from it. You set up how often you take damage from it when in contact with this. Werewolf with silver, for instance, is another good example. And then how common is the condition? Okay, silver, it's well known that werewolves are susceptible to silver, but silver isn't common, so it should be uncommon, right? No, it should be common. Because again, everybody knows silver hurts werewolves. So if I know I'm facing werewolves, I'm pretty sure I'm going to go find some silver somewhere, right? So this condition and the situational element of this can be changed by various aspects. If you're susceptible to water and take damage anytime you get water on you because you're from a fire planet, um, that's going to be very common here on Earth. So you're going to have a bad day. I think they did a movie about that, didn't they? So, you know, this is something again, you take damage from it. Most people are not. You do take damage from it, though it is possible that it is not a standard damage. It could be a drain against your powers or a particular characteristic or something like that with GM approval. You set how often you take that damage, and then you and your GM decide how common that situation is. And you've got your susceptibility. Pretty neat, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So then there's unluck. Now, there's two ways of handling unluck. The bottom line is you are unlucky. For some GMs, this means that whenever things are going right for your character, whenever things are going well, you take a number of d6 depending on how much unluck you took. You throw that, and for every one that comes up, you have 1 point of unluck. At the 1 point of unluck level, a civilian keeps getting in your line of fire, and you can't hit the bad guy. A flower pot fell from a second floor, clunked you in the head, and the bad guy got away. It's inconveniencing. It's type stuff. At the two point level, which is possible with 2d6, we're talking about you can actually be harmed by what's going on, though still just minimally. You slip and fall when you didn't even notice that rock was there or something like that. At the 3 point level, you can start taking some pretty significant damage. Things really don't go your way. A bus slams into you when you were about to take that final shot at the villain. Something like that happens. 3d6, you are extremely unlucky. You've got problems. 4d6 is just like the 3d6 level, only now your buddies can be affected. So if you got 4d6 of unluck and you roll 4 dice, your buddies get 1 die, the equivalent of 1 pip of unluck, and you take the 3. Okay? And so finally at 5d6 of unluck, your buddies could end up with the equivalent of 2 points of unluck, and you still take the 3. Okay? The bottom line is taking more than 3d6 of unluck is probably going to sooner or later annoy your fellow players again. And that's why there's a limit of only 5 dice of unluck. Then you've got people like me. When I'm a GM and somebody takes unluck, I make unluck a role-playing element. I simply have the situations like I've described happen. A bus drives in the way when you were about to lay the bad guy down, and you didn't get the shot, and when the bus clears out of the way, he's gone or she's gone. I'm simply going to make things like that happen occasionally. At 2d6, they're going to happen more often with potentially more serious complications coming about from it, and at 3d6 and so forth. So for me, unluck and luck are not just dice rolls. They're role-playing elements. They're things that happen that I work into the narrative of how this battle goes down. And some people treat it like that. Some people just treat it as a straight-up dice roll. Both are valid options under the system. Both have rules that make suggestions as to how to handle these things. So again, most you can take is 5d6 of unluck, and your fellow players at the table are going to be very unhappy with you if you take more than 3, because that begins to affect them. At 4 and 5, the unluck affects your whole party. Okay, so keep that in mind. Finally, there's vulnerability. This is there to to simulate things like a glass jaw. You have a part of your body where you simply take more damage if it's hit. Um, your powers are fire based, and so water will extinguish them or hurt you real bad. Things like that. So, generally speaking, it's taken as, 1.5 times stun, 1.5 times body, 1.5 times effect, or 2 times any of those things. 2 times simply doubles the amount that you get for the disadvantage. And the attack sets the frequency. Is the attack fairly common, uncommon, or very common? For instance, if you have the proverbial glass jaw, somebody hits you in the face, in the head, and you take 2 times stun from it, that would be very common. Because, or actually, that would probably be common given how frequently a headshot comes up. Um, but there we have that. You set up again how common you take it and then how much stun. So, bottom line, this disadvantage is different from susceptibility in that these are effects and attacks that affect everyone and do damage to everybody. They just hurt you more. Okay? And so oftentimes I see these taken in pairs because people will take the 1.5 times stun as a vulnerability, but then also take the 1.5 times body, so that they are hurt equally both in the concussion and the shock of it that's going to knock them out, but also they are physically harmed by the attack more than anybody else would be. And so that's vulnerability, and it's pretty easy, other than the fact that people are real antsy about taking vulnerabilities. They want to get as many points of them as they can out of it, but at the same time they don't want the GM laying their character flat by the use of this attack. The problem is that's the whole point of the disadvantage. Your character is going to be flattened by this type of attack. Okay? So just don't take a vulnerability if that's not already in your working plan for how to play the character and how the character is going to handle the situation. So that is all of the disadvantages. We've gone an hour and a quarter. I am going to make a few final comments on these. I'm going to repeat once again that the old adage is that if a disadvantage doesn't disadvantage you, if it doesn't limit you in some way or your character in some way, it's not worth any points. Okay? So don't be mad if a GM comes back and says, no, I'm not going to give that to you. If it's not significant enough that it plays a significant role in the game, it's not going to be worth any points. Okay? As inconveniencing as it might be, not having a driver's license, for instance, is not going to be a disadvantage unless you live out in the middle of nowhere, because there's always public transportation. Or even if you live out in the middle of nowhere, if you're the freaking Flash, having no driver's license is not going to be a limitation. It's not going to be a disadvantage. You can run there probably faster than you could drive there. Get over it. So keep in mind that your GM is the final arbiter. He is not your enemy, or she. They're not your enemy, but they're trying to run a game and they're trying to keep things on the up and up. So think in terms of flaws and things that will actually hurt your character, and those are where you're looking for disadvantages. You're not trying to get free points. Okay, if that's what you're trying to do, just take your base points, make the best character you can, and don't worry about taking disadvantages, because there you're trying to game the system. All right. So, unless there are any comments from anybody out there in the peanut gallery, I'm going to close this stream out. Check who texted me while we were in the middle of this, and we'll call it a stream. So I'll wait a second or two for people to type, because I did have a watcher or two pop in. Christmas. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it, got something out of it. I don't know if you play Hero or not. And for anybody who might view this later, I don't know if you play or not, but I hope you got something out of it, because there are several systems that use this whole same idea of disadvantages in the RPG. So hopefully you got something out of it. Until next time, though, have a good one. We'll talk to you later. See you later, Christmas.